There's more happening than we can see, and today's conversation is about what that actually means without making it bigger than it needs to be. In this episode, we're talking about intuition as a human sense, not an identity, not a role, and not something you're supposed to activate, interpret, or act on. This is for anyone who's been noticing more and wondering whether they're supposed to do anything with it. We'll slow it down, bring it back to perception, and talk about how to stay grounded while understanding what you're experiencing. Welcome to More Than We See. Let's begin. There's more happening than we see. For some people, that feels exciting, and for others, it can be really confusing. And for many, it's something they've felt their whole lives, but never quite had that language for it. Welcome to More Than We See. This is a grounded conversation about intuition as a human sense. Not something to chase, not something to dramatize, and not something to being reserved for a select few, but something we understand and live with. If intuition has been showing up more clearly for you lately, or if you've been noticing things you can't quite explain, this is the place to slow down, get steady, and make sense of what you're experiencing without giving your power away to any part of it. I'm Natalie, and today we're starting at the beginning. And before we go anywhere else, I want to make something really clear, because a lot of people are going to tense up about right now. You don't need to believe anything to be here. You don't need to label yourself. And you don't need to do anything with what you do notice. If you're listening while driving or walking or doing something else, just let this be in the background. Nothing here requires urgency. This podcast is not about turning intuition on. It's about understanding what's already happening. And if you're wondering why this conversation seems to be everywhere lately, you're not imagining it. You're not alone. Intuition is being talked about more openly right now. And not in a fringe way, but in everyday conversations. Parents are noticing things their kids say. Like, a child asking a question that stops you for a second. Not because it's strange, but because it's precise in a way that you didn't expect. Or adults are reflecting on patterns that they've always felt but never trusted. People realizing they've been picking up more than they thought and wondering what that all actually means. For some, this can feel empowering. For others, it can create that uncertainty. I hear questions like, is this intuition or is it just me being sensitive? Or why am I noticing this now? Am I supposed to do something with this? And underneath those questions is something deeper. A desire to stay sovereign, to stay grounded, to not hand authority over to something external just because it feels unfamiliar. And that's the moment we're in right now. And it's why this conversation matters. So let's slow this way down for a second, because a lot of confusion comes from how intuition gets framed in the first place. So here's the core frame I want to offer today. Intuition is not an identity. It's not a role that you step into. It's not something you become. Intuition is a form of perception, just like your sight or hearing, just like noticing the emotional tone in a room, or sensing when something has shifted around you. Every human being perceives information beyond what's strictly logical or verbal. Some people notice this earlier, some notice it more frequently, some were encouraged to trust it, others were taught to ignore it. None of that makes somebody special. And I don't mean that in a diminishing way. We're all unique and we're all special in our own ways. What it does is open a frame of awareness that may not have been there before. And awareness doesn't require your performance or any performance. You don't need to do anything with it. You just honor it the same way you would honor any of your other senses. One of the biggest misconceptions around intuition is that if you notice it, you're supposed to do something with it. You're supposed to interpret it or act on it, explain it somehow, or make it mean something bigger. But perception doesn't work that way. It never has. You don't interpret every sound you hear. You don't assign it meaning for every sensation that you've had. You notice, and then you stay oriented to the moment that you're in. And that's how I'm talking about intuition on this podcast, as what it is, a sense, a very human sense. If you're actively developing it, sure, I want you to track what you notice. Write those things down. Be curious. Get those data points. But you're living with it the same way you live with all of your other senses. The work is much simpler. You stay oriented in the moment that you're in, because intuition works best the same way our other senses do. Honestly. And if you're listening to this thinking, okay, but why does it feel like a lot right now? That's a really fair question. When people first start noticing intuition more clearly, or when you remember, if you look back when you started to notice it, what it felt like when that first happened, it can feel intense. Not because intuition is loud, but because the awareness to it is new. Anytime awareness expands like that, the nervous system starts paying attention and it begins to adjust with you. There can be excitement, there can be curiosity, there can also be a sense of, why didn't I notice this before? Is this a magic power I've got now? It doesn't mean anything is wrong, and it doesn't mean something needs to be amplified. It means perception is coming online in a way that feels conscious. And consciousness doesn't need escalation. It needs you to stay steady and in that moment. Which brings us to the least dramatic way of a tool that you're probably ever going to be offered. So this is the try it zone. So here's something very simple I want you to try this week, or you might want to. Just notice what you perceive and don't interpret it. Before you decide what it means, before you label it intuition, before you assign a story, that might look like noticing a body sensation, sensing a shift in a conversation, having a quiet knowing without any urgency behind it, and then doing nothing with it. No journaling, no action required, just noticing. This isn't about sharpening your intuition. It's about staying present with perception without letting it take over. And this is where I want to anchor something important, because this part often gets missed. Noticing more does not mean you owe anything to what you notice. You do not have to act. You don't have to interpret. You don't have to identify anything. Intuition is meant to support life, not interrupt it. It works best when you remain grounded in your body, your relationships, and your everyday choices. Sovereignty doesn't come from having answers. It comes from staying connected to yourself. And that's really the heart of this show. So as we wrap up today, just notice how you feel right now. Not what you understand, not what you think you should do next, just how your body feels after slowing down for a few minutes with me. You don't need to hold on to anything from today. You don't need to figure anything out. If something stayed with you from this, let it stay lightly. And if questions come up about intuition or experiences that feel a little outside of your usual frame, you're welcome to reach out. I'm always happy to share a perspective. I'll see you next time on More Than We See.